Good morning.
Are you able to log in?
Yeah, it's already.
Oh, good. Yeah, because I had a problem this morning, so I wanted to make sure you don't.
Really?
Yeah, I had to suddenly put a password and log in and send a SFIT email, the code, and I had to suddenly, like a verification problem. So I was like,
no,
okay.
it's actually working. Yeah.
Okay.
pretty well, yeah.
It was actually funny. I had an alarm call. It's not a critique. It's just like funny because it was like a psychopath. I had an alarm call on Sunday for the pier. Something happened, and I looked, and I was like, okay, let me check the thing, and everything was dark. Just here, Big Brother's watching. This was like shining like crazy because the screen was still on. So in the full darkness, it was like, I don't know, the TV was still on. Nobody cares, but it was. It was like a disco was going on before, because I looked at the cameras, it's all dark, and I'm like, what's happening? I'm like, oh, this is so scary. But it looked like, Big Brother is watching you, like some kind of psychopath. I'm like, what is going on? I'm like, oh no, that's a Zoom thing. Like, it's all good, no police will get it.
Oh, wow. And what was the reason of the alarm?
I don't know.
You don't know?
So, but I don't know. We don't. I didn't see any. Maybe they had a whole event, so maybe some people were banging. They had 3 days of free days that they should not turn in. So
Yeah.
maybe that. Okay. No cameras.
It's coming.
Oh,
Yes.
nice.
Hi.
Hey, good
Hey,
morning.
good morning. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Should go quickly because I think it's going to last so long. It's cool. Oh, that's pretty cool. How far was that? Okay, yeah, so that's what I think. It's like 5 hours. Okay. Yes, I'm not sure. It's not.
Hi, Joyce.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
Hi. Good morning. Hi.
Wonderful. Good to
How
see
are you? Good.
Doing well. Well, I guess it's good timing that we had to do this virtually because my husband had tested positive for COVID last week, and then I tested positive for it a few days later. So I'm apologize if I have to drink water and blow my nose. Luckily, the symptoms aren't so bad, but I
Sorry
hope
to
all of
hear.
you stay healthy and stay well.
Yeah, sorry to hear, actually. I hope you're fine.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have known to test were it not for the fact that he had it. But then I think there's some psychology behind it. Once you know you're positive, then suddenly all of a sudden I was like, oh, my nose feels really sniffly. And, so I actually
Yeah.
felt very fine until I got the positive result.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think we can start.
Great. So welcome. And I guess maybe I could get a quick, we don't have to go do intros with everyone around the room, but I just wanted to get a quick sense of, who is both around the table and dialing in virtually, so I can make sure to keep this conversation as targeted as possible.
Sure, makes sense. Maybe we can start from here, right? Roman?
Hi, good morning. My name is Roman. I'm a CFO of Antena.
Hey, I'm Jiri. I'm co-founder of WebTower, currently responsible for market department.
Hi, I am Joyce. I am the founder of Chris, is artificial intelligence helping human resources to make their authentic answer for the interactor.
I am Laurent, in charge of business for Swan Network, co-founded with us.
I was leading engineer for Swissnex.
I'm Matteo, I'm the CEO of Antena.
Hi, my name is Zhang. I'm the founder and CEO of FitWorld for gym industry and fitness in general.
Great.
Can you hear them?
I could hear, yes, I could hear most of what people were saying. I didn't catch everyone's name, but it sounds like a very diverse set of industries. And so hopefully there's at least some consistencies in terms of, launching and hiring sales and BD in the US in spite of, selling very different products and being in very different industries.
Sure, and we have a few companies joining us that are bound for the East Coast, both in Boston and in New York. So in Boston, there are 4 companies. I'll let a couple of them that are here introduce themselves and perhaps specify what vertical you're in. So that would be.
Maybe I can kick it off. Hi, so my name is Martin. Hi, great to meet you, Joyce, and the group. I'm the CEO of 90 Labs, and we are a technology manufacturing company. So a technology company focused on manufacturing technology, and we are bound for Boston. So looking forward to the session. Great to meet you all.
And then maybe Fiona, Confia.
Yeah, hi all, I'm Fiona. I'm the clinical affairs manager at Confia, which is a medtech company developing an implantable neurostimulator.
And then we have a couple companies for New York, Adresta, Nicolas, and then Alexander. I can't quite remember which company you are.
Yeah, hi, I'm not a company. I'm a student at ETH Zurich. I'm part of an entrepreneurship program called Talent Kick, which is partnered with Swissnex, and I'm currently at Stanford. So this is why I'm from the San Francisco base. And thanks for letting me join today's session. Yeah.
Great. I see Josephine's also dialing in from Swissnex. Well, wonderful. Thank you everyone for the wonderful introduction. My name is Joyce. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Alariss Global. And our mission is to bridge global business opportunities, helping international companies launch successfully in the US, and also helping the top American salespeople find great remote jobs where they can be really pivotal and transformational in the launch of a company. So I have prepared a presentation for everyone. I see we have a few others joining. Nice to meet you, Andrea and Natalia. So I have a presentation that I've prepared. We'll go through it for the next half hour or so. I might speed through some pieces, and it's hard to judge everyone's facial reactions who's sitting in the conference room, but I'll just be monitoring people's facial reactions on the Zoom screen. So if people seem bored, then I'll just rush through a couple of things. And please do ask questions. I might answer some of them later, at which point I can let you know, but I would prefer to make this as helpful for all of you as possible and a live and interactive discussion, because that's one of the best parts about watching an actual person talk instead of a recording, which I know over Zoom can sometimes feel like, it might be a recording. In the metaverse, what do you know is real and what is not real? So without further ado, I will do a quick share screen. Excellent. And start the presentation. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Fantastic. And I will make sure that I did not lose okay, perfect. So how to successfully launch in the USA with local go-to-market teams, which I understand is what many of you are interested in, and why you are now in San Francisco, in New York, in Palo Alto. Our mission, as I mentioned, is to bridge these opportunities, but one of our visions is that your country of origin should not limit your global ambitions. And one of the things that we've seen is that in years past, the conventional wisdom was that you have to be in Silicon Valley in order to succeed. So if you're a founder based in Zurich or Paris or Tel Aviv or Beijing, you would have to relocate your entire team and your office to the Bay Area in order to succeed. But one of the things that we've really found of late, and especially with the rise of the future of work and this acknowledgement during a global pandemic, that people can be just as responsive and also just as effective virtually as they could in person. This has actually really democratized the playing field and made it possible for even the earliest stage companies to come to the US. And as I personally like to say, because it was Mother's Day in the US yesterday, it allows for those of us with families and other responsibilities that would require us to be in our own countries to not have to travel and live as an expat abroad for long periods of time. So it really makes global business something that is now much more accessible and democratized. But to give you a little bit more background on myself and my co-founder and how we came up with this idea for Alariss, I know that Alexander said that he's at Stanford. I went to business school there, really love the campus. My business partner and I met at Harvard undergrad, where we both studied international relations. So we came at it from a very international relations, connecting the world background, as you can probably guess. And he became a diplomat after college, and I joined the Federal Reserve, and later on was in emerging markets in many other countries launching US companies abroad. So American tech companies launching abroad is actually in some ways very similar to Swiss companies launching in the US. You, in the conventional ways, you fly over to the country in question, you try to set up a legal entity, you try to do all the recruiting and so on and so forth. It's very manual, it's very capital intensive. And we had the benefit of course, I worked for companies that were well capitalized like Microsoft, but it was still very challenging and it wasn't always successful the first time you try it. And fast forward a little bit, now, like I mentioned with the future of work, a lot of that doesn't have to be the case, but international business is still very challenging and yet rewarding. And we're synthesizing a lot of our background and experiences in diplomacy and in launching global companies for helping the rest of the world launch in the US. I probably don't need to go into this. It's kind of self-explanatory. You've decided you want to launch in the US, so you don't need to be convinced of the opportunity. But the typical expansion process has been very painful of years past. And these are estimates on the kind of lower end. It usually takes at least 6 months, if not more, to launch a branch office in another country. And that includes just a go-to-market branch. And it would usually take quite a bit of money and time. So I probably mixed the orders of the slides around a little bit, but this, I think you probably don't need to know as much about having empathy and self-awareness. We kind of go through this because we work with companies based all over the world. And one thing that I think is key to remember is that though you might be the market leader in your own country, and obviously you're here sponsored by Swissnex, which means you've already gone through a very rigorous screening process to get here, a lot of that brand equity does not translate to another market. And there isn't as much acknowledgement or understanding of what happens in other countries. And so you kind of have to reinvent yourself in many ways from scratch. You have to build up the credibility and keep in mind that talent is in quite short supply anywhere in the world. Hiring in the US market is very competitive, et cetera, et cetera. And so you have to think of this as kind of a two-way sell. In order to close the salespeople, you yourself, usually the founders, which many of you from what I heard are the founders and C-level people at your companies, usually the founders have to be very involved in this. And it might feel, sometimes it might feel very thankless. I know that some founders are much more technical and so would prefer to build product and do internal operations, but it is something that is very rewarding and you have to be quite involved in the process yourself. So a few steps to expanding successfully. And again, we can go through this fairly quickly as well, because I understand that most of you are most interested. Actually, maybe I'll do a quick show of hands. How many of you are most interested in learning about hiring the salespeople? Okay. And then how many are more interested in learning how to kind of do market discovery and sort of figure out how to like find customers in the US? Well, obviously, those two go hand in hand. Okay, so it's a bit of a split, it looks like. Slightly more on the subject of hiring, so I'll focus on that a little bit more, but keep in mind, the whole point of hiring someone locally is to be able to help you expand and to get revenue. And one of the ways that I thought about it too is, you know, when I was launching in other countries, even though I might speak the language, because I speak a couple of languages from having grown up as a child of immigrants, and even if I understand and have great empathy for the local culture and love the cuisine, it doesn't necessarily mean that I am the best person to lead a go-to-market team or to get customers, because as many of you, I heard you're in very niche areas, and some of it, like, you know, whether it's healthcare or manufacturing, even sports and athletics. I remember I heard a gentleman on the very far side mention that many of these industries are have higher barriers to entry because it takes time to build up a Rolodex and to build up that trust and credibility. So in some ways, you can think of this as acquiring that when you acquire the right representative who can bring with them a lot of that credibility and the networks and connections into your company. So the first is founder-led selling and identifying your ICPs. This is quite important because it's a losing proposition if you hire a salesperson without knowing who your customers are. Your salesperson, we oftentimes call them more like an entrepreneur in residence, because the founding salesperson is more like a founder in the US team or founder in the US office than just a person who's taking your sales playbook. But that being said, they still need to have direction from you. Ideally, you already have a little bit of a pipeline or at least some LOIs signed with US customers. You would need to understand who your customers are, because that will give you a strong grounding, and also knowing if your pricing is appropriate, who your customers are, and then ultimately who your salesperson will be that you need to hire in order to speak to those customers. So even within, let's say, healthcare, you could be selling to insurance companies, you could be selling to payers, you could be selling to hospital systems, you could be selling to doctors, nurses, or HR departments, staff nurses. Like within the umbrella of healthcare, there are a myriad numbers of ICPs, or ideal customer personas, that you need to figure out who you're selling to. And it's very hard to find a one size fits all, because the US is such a large, competitive, and diverse market. Every single industry is bifurcated into very specific verticals and even sizes. So you could be at the small business sort of high volume level, you could be at the mid-market level, you could be enterprise. It's really incumbent upon you as the founders to figure out this initial pipeline and the initial playbook before you go out and hire someone. Otherwise, you're setting them up for failure, and you might feel frustrated that they're not performing at their job, but they will feel frustrated at you that you're giving them an impossible mandate and that they're not going to be well set up. So I guess how many people here feel like they know who their ICPs are? Or even better, how many people have some customers or at least some like signed contracts in the US already? Great. That's great. So for those who don't yet have that, then it is important that you start trying to build a pipeline. I know it feels very difficult because it's a chicken and egg problem. If I don't have the salesperson to do it, then how can I sell deals or close pipelines? Keep in mind, having an LOI or a letter of intent is it's a much lower bar than having an actual an actual sale, especially if some of you, I overheard your industries sound like they have very long sales cycles and they're a much more complex product that you're selling, especially in manufacturing. So it's very understandable if you don't have a client that's already paid you money and signed up, because sometimes that entire process from start to finish to sell and close a deal might take a year. And then it takes another year to do the technical implementation. And during that time, you might have run out of venture money. So probably a lot of the investors who invested should know at least some of the general sales processes, but you would want to know yourself the LOI, you would want to know yourself what customers' pain you're actually solving and who would become your eventual customer, and therefore who you should strategically align your entire go-to-market team to go after. The second would be decide on your objectives. I know this sounds really basic, and of course everyone's objective is very similar, like, oh, I want to make a lot of revenue, I want to grow the company, but not all objectives are the same. It is very difficult to, again, like have the sales team built up and then suddenly you have this windfall of cash and everything's perfect. Depending on your company, depending on the structure, depending on your product, your objective might be as simple as, we just want to have a pipeline to be able to raise our Series A or Series B to get to the next level. Some of them might be, we want to become break even. We want the US to become our main source of revenue. And therefore, this is the timeline that we need it by. There's an entire art as well to setting sales commission. But I would also say that when you're negotiating with your initial sales hires, you can give them a compensation structure that includes commission, but they're still taking a huge risk on you, because it's unlikely that you have a repeatable process because if you did, you probably wouldn't have to, find someone who's the first. If you had a repeatable process you could hand off to them, then you're just adding incremental headcount. It's much easier than if it's the first couple of salespeople who are taking this risk, because again, salespeople are usually driven by commission. They want to make money, but the right salesperson, which is why Alariss really specializes on this in our case, the right salesperson is interested and excited about your mission, about the ability to build a startup and to kind of accelerate the growth of a company. The right person might also love the fact that you're actually based in Switzerland, so they feel like they get global exposure, they get to learn about other countries. But the wrong salesperson, and I see this happening all the time, some clients want them because their resume looks really attractive, but the wrong salesperson puts up a lot of, asks a lot of sort of probing questions that make it clear that they're kind of skeptical. Either they don't really believe in your product, they find working different time zones to be really onerous, they're not a team player, they need things kind of set up for them. Trust your instincts, look for those yellow flags, because it is much more expensive for you to make the wrong hire and to go through this entire process onboarding someone who quits after a month or two, rather than just finding the right person at the beginning, even if that person is a little more junior and doesn't have exactly the resume you want. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on, the different sales personas. Third, and this goes into your budget as well, is to create a budget and go-to-market strategy. So you want to be very clear about your budget, because sales hiring is expensive. And I've definitely had some companies that reached out to me and said, oh, we want to hire a person on full commission. Like the commission upside is huge. We could make like millions of dollars of revenue. We'll give them 5%. And so, 5% of $1 million is quite a lot. And then we're looking at like $10 million. So this should be really enticing to them, or even 10%. We're willing to give them like 10%. That doesn't really work, because again, like I said, it is a huge amount of risk they're taking, and people need to pay for their, basic living expenses. So base salary plus commission is the standard. If it's an SDR or if it's a sales development representative or account executive, then usually it's about 50-50, sometimes 60-40, sometimes 40-60, but it's usually within that range of base salary and the expected on-target earnings or commission inclusive. And then if it's a VP of sales or someone who's more senior, then their base salary is going to be much higher. They also would expect quite a bit of equity, ideally, in the company, because they view themselves as a very strategic kind of senior member of the team, and their commission would be kind of equalized out across the entire team. Like they'll start off perhaps as more of an individual contributor, but then ultimately the goal is for them to scale a team and to kind of realize the overall commission of their entire team. But you want to create a budget for hiring, and you want to allocate that budget in a way that is reasonable and realistic and grounded in what you want. But also, as you start talking to people, and I see this happening all the time, you'll probably meet someone that you absolutely adore. You think this person's amazing. And then they come in at a salary level that's way higher than what you had budgeted. And again, there's no good answer for how to handle that. Like, This is also why I mentioned founder-led selling, and having the founder pitch and recruit is really important, because you can directly negotiate and figure out, well, maybe it's what else can you kind of play around with? Maybe it's like title, maybe it's equity, maybe it's like vacation days, maybe it's like other intangibles that they want. Like getting to understand and know them as a person and why they're taking on this job and what their priorities are can actually give you a much broader toolkit in order to actually close these deals. And by these deals, I mean closing these candidates.
Joyce?
So oh, go ahead. Did someone ask a question?
Yeah. I don't know, maybe we'll come to that, but are you also able to indicate to us some ranges for,
Yes, this is
for different levels of, oh, okay. That's
perfect timing. Good question. So this is for right now, or maybe as of like a couple of months ago, things vary dramatically. And one thing that I will note is that the US has 50 states. Right now, everyone on this call seems to be split between 2 states, California and New York. And as far as most people are concerned, those are the only states that they ever think of or are aware of, but there are 48 other states. So, whoops, sorry, I just realized I clicked out. There are 48 other states. So one of the things that I want to note is that these are national averages. They are much below average for the states where you are right now. California and New York have the highest cost of living and also the highest salaries of any place. San Francisco and New York are probably the two most expensive cities in the world. I know that, like, Basel and Geneva and Zurich are also quite expensive, but you've probably heard a lot of complaints from friends who live in San Francisco or the Bay Area. San Francisco is very expensive. So these are the average nationally. And the reason we give you the national average is one of the other things we encourage companies do is to be very open-minded, because if you're selling into an industry that either actually has a hub in another part, like for example, automotive manufacturing in the US is concentrated around Detroit, Michigan, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Those are in the Midwest. They are not in New York or California. And if anything, if you're selling into those clients, you'd probably be overpaying and under leveraging resources by trying to hire someone in New York or California in order to accomplish that. And then for other clients still, now that, especially with Zoom, remote work is more tenable. And even before Zoom, it was very common for SDRs, for example, to just be making phone calls at high volume. Like an SDR has to make back-to-back nonstop phone calls, about 100 a week or more than that. Like, it's a grind. It is a very laborious and labor intensive, and sometimes can feel thankless as a job, which is why people usually become SDRs and they kind of graduate to AEs after 2 years or so, and you want to make sure to check in on morale and everything else. But it can be a grind. And yet, if their job is just to make nonstop phone calls, send like cold emails, and kind of get on Zoom videos, they can be anywhere. So be open-minded. It's probably your next SDR or account executive could be in Iowa or Nebraska or Louisiana. Has anyone ever been to any of these states? I've noted, actually, just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I have a question. Is like 200K is like is base plus a bonus?
This is the average base salary.
Base salary.
Yes. So sorry.
Okay,
In the US, here are the average base. So maybe the words are too small to read. I'll just read it out. So in the US, here are the average base salaries and salary ranges.
Base.
Yeah, for sales talent, and on target earnings is usually double the base when quota is. Obviously, yeah, if they don't reach their bonus, then you're only back to the whole thing about like the budget. And this is maybe too niche, but when you budget in the US, especially for accounting purposes, cost of revenue is usually commission. So it does not go against your gross margins to have the base salary, but your commission, I shouldn't say is counted against gross margin, but like as from an accounting perspective, it is important to separate that out. But OTE is only assuming that they hit their full targets. But the other thing to note is that if you hire a salesperson in their head, my finger is disappearing when I do this, in their head, they are thinking of their salary as being OTE. So if they go for like a couple of subsequent months where they're not hitting or exceeding even their target, like they will quit before you fire them. especially because there's such a shortage of sales talent. So the salespeople want the money, they want their commission. If you set their commission and you set their targets to be so high that it's unrealistic, or if your product is not ready to go to market, they will probably quit. So that's something else to be mindful of. But yes, these are average base salaries in the US. In the Bay Area, this, especially the VP of sales, I've definitely seen it go into the millions for later stage companies. So just be prepared, like I said. And this is also why I really like to emphasize, I grew up in Michigan and Texas and was born in Maryland myself. These are all states that probably no one on this call has been to, although maybe Maryland, if you've been to Washington, DC, Maryland is like right next to it. But the point is that there are many diverse places to get talent from. So if you're open-minded and if you really leverage the full possibilities of remote work, you won't get as much sticker shock. But if you shop around only in San Francisco, that's going to be tough. And that's also why, like I said, with Alariss, we really believe in this vision of democratizing access for everyone. It's not just democratizing access for companies in Europe, it's also democratizing access for great sales talent that's located outside of the coastal regions. This I actually think is not a problem for Swiss companies. I have definitely seen this as a problem for other companies from other countries, but if anything, in Switzerland, your labor protections are way higher and better than our labor protections, and you give much more generous like paid parental leave, whereas the US is not guaranteed. And there's a whole different topic about that, but I'm just going to skip over this because I don't think you're going to have a problem with this. But just as a quick reminder, I have to give this reminder to a lot of companies that do not come from as labor friendly of a market, but discrimination on the basis of any of these protected classes is illegal in the US. And so you're also not allowed to ask these questions. If they decide to voluntarily give you this information, they can, but you can't ask for these things. And the one that gets the most questions is current or previous compensation. This is actually not across the board. Some states still allow this because the US, I mentioned earlier, has 50 states. There's like the federal government, there's certain laws that are federally protected. So there's like federal protections around race, religion, et cetera. But current or previous compensation is only protected at the state level. In California, it is absolutely protected. And what it means is you can't ask for this because they're trying to make sure that people are not discriminated against, that if they're being underpaid right now, let's say because they're working at a nonprofit or they're working parents, the current pay stub is not going to be benchmarked and not going to preclude them from better pay later. So I think this is probably the only one that I get questions about from companies from Switzerland. But does anyone have any questions about this? I assume not, because again.
I have a question, Joyce.
Okay.
Just like from a very practical point of view, if let's assume like there's someone in for an interview and you don't ask those questions, it's just a regular interview, went well, and maybe there's a lunch scheduled right after, and over lunch, I mean, that person actually maybe let's for this for instance asks me in this particular case about, I don't know, if I'm married, where I come from, and so a little bit like those questions, but just on a very casual basis. Mm-hmm. And then I would ask back, yeah, hey, like how is it on your side? Would that be too much, or like how do you handle this kind of situations?
That's totally fine. Like I said, if it's self-reported, and especially if they ask you first, if it's self-reported, then it's not an issue. And you can apply the same frameworks you would use in Switzerland, because I know in Switzerland, it's very, like I said, Switzerland is even more protective of labor than the US. But you can use the same heuristics, which is if it's obviously like you're going to get to know each other, you're going to get to know colleagues, but you also want to make sure to like have a very clear record. And this is outside the scope of this current conversation, but if you were to terminate someone, you need to make sure to have very clearly in writing, like a track record of, what their KPIs and expectations are and why they're going to be terminated, so that it does not call into question later on for a wrongful termination lawsuit. This is another difference. In the US, on average, it is slightly more litigious of a country than in many other countries. There are lots of lawyers and lawyers are great. I have a lot of friends who are lawyers, but it also is true that anytime there's a lawsuit, both like lawyers on both sides will benefit. So you just need to make sure to cover yourself and not have it called into question. The other nice thing about hiring salespeople is it's very clear. Oftentimes it's very clear because it's about performance and KPIs and revenue. So if they're not hitting their revenue targets, and if it's very clearly documented what the expectations are for them, then termination is a natural course of action. But it gets into a murky area where someone is terminated without any just cause or prior notice, and then they kind of start to read between the lines and say, oh, I'm being treated differently, and I was fired when all these other people who are very similar to me, but were a different, protected class from me, were not fired because I'm being discriminated against. Great. This is also, compliance mistakes, et cetera. This part is kind of tricky because in the US, there's been a lot of debate recently, especially in Silicon Valley, around 1099s and W-2s and misclassification of employees. We can go into that another time. But that's also something where working through Alariss or a similar kind of like partner will help you with, because then that local compliance is usually taken care of in the offerings. So finally, building your sales team. You can recruit directly yourself. You can work with a partner. But it's, again, keep in mind that there's this competitive talent market, and the highest quality talent is often passive, not active. So there are some things which make it, oh, go ahead.
Just, could you go back to the compliance? I think I would be interested, and I think that other people would be interested.
This slide?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Yeah, happy to. Great. So I will kind of talk about this a little bit. So paying employees under the table, I think that goes without saying. You need to pay in a proper way. There needs to be tax documents, because the IRS is I don't know if anyone's familiar. There's a famous American gangster named Al Capone. And after years, if not decades of terrorizing, and running like a, the mob effectively, he was actually finally indicted on tax evasion, because there was no evidence or record or ability to arrest him for anything else but tax evasion. It was. And this is also something that, gets a lot of people when they're going towards for confirmation, like Senate confirmation hearings and things like that. This is the #1 thing that gets that is easy to pull out. So tax evasion and paying people without properly reporting taxes is something that the IRS takes pretty seriously. It's run by the Treasury Department. And so this is something I see, again, I don't think I see it as much from Western Europe, but I see this from other countries where they'll find someone on LinkedIn and they'll have this arrangement where they're like, oh yeah, I will just send you, I'll just send you Venmo or PayPal or crypto or whatever it is to compensate you for your time, and you'll work with me. That just falls into that's technically illegal. I guess if it's in the early stages, a lot of people kind of get away with it because it's quite small, but you don't want to set that precedent. So that's one of the #1 things we see foreign companies that try to hire direct in the US kind of start doing. The other would be, and then, filing incorrect tax returns, that kind of goes hand in hand, because you need to report, who you're employing. Even if they're a contractor, you have to kind of report that. And sometimes certain countries would also have that requirement. So you might need to pay taxes to the Swiss government as well. I'm not as familiar. So, you would need to just see and understand that. But the other big category is the misclassification of employees as independent contractors. And so I mentioned earlier that Uber, Lyft, a lot of the gig economy jobs have kind of faced this. 1099 is meant to be a contractor classification. So it's actually fine to have someone as your independent contractor at the beginning, because you truly are exploring. So if you're looking to build out your US go-to-market motion, but you're not exactly sure what that will look like and what the office is, we actually do suggest and recommend that companies start off with some independent contractors, because there are a couple of benefits. One, it's, everyone's expectation is aligned accordingly. So if you run out of budget, or if you have to, basically close down for whatever reason, you're not liable for, the severance, and their expectation is, okay, this is a 3-month engagement, then we'll revisit closer to that time. So no one is upset, and they don't feel like, we have to be paid for damages from lost wages because I took a job with you that was meant to be full-time. Your company ran out of funding or shut down, but now I feel like because I took your job instead of working somewhere else where I could have had more pay for longer, I need, a more of a severance package. So I think that, again, with Switzerland, you are probably very familiar with this because your labor laws are very protective. So this is something that is probably not as foreign to you, but independent contractors just makes sure that everyone understands there is some risk involved, but there is also high upside and it can convert. So then there's this phrase called contract to hire, which is actually what we would often recommend because startups are inherently risky. You want to make sure that people understand what they're getting themselves into. And you also want to be able to protect yourself. And you also want to be able to understand, even if things go well, maybe you work with 2 different contractors and you were testing it out. One of them one of them was like, very well connected and had a great Rolodex. I'll go into the different personas later. And then the other one was like, had no experience, but was hardworking. And you found that actually the person with no experience and was hardworking was a better fit. So you want to double down on that. And the person with a really good Rolodex was actually quite irrelevant because the Rolodex kind of capped out after like the first 2 referrals. So in that case, it's much easier to sort of politely end the contract because you realize one persona of salesperson wasn't working than if you had to figure out termination and then to give the W-2 offer to the second person. And W-2, you could also start off with W-2 right away because sometimes talent in the US will want to be W-2 and they don't want to start off as a contractor because the opportunity cost is too high for them. So that's something else you can do. But usually from what we've seen, it's not that people care about W-2 and 1099, it's because they care about health insurance. So one other point to note is that if you have a good health insurance provider, you can actually provide health insurance for a 1099, which again is something that platforms like Alariss can help with, but it's something that you would just need to figure out and set up at some point if you do it on your own. Does that help? Okay, awesome. Let me just do a quick time check. Okay, I will breeze through some of this. So like I mentioned, you can recruit yourselves, you can work with a partner, but the other thing to note is that most of the best talent is passive, not actively searching. So it does, if you post a job posting on like Indeed or LinkedIn, you're very unlikely to find a key hire through that. You can definitely try it. We always encourage companies to do that, but they usually are disappointed by the quality because it's such a competitive market that everyone is working with, recruiters and everyone's kind of working on like branding and social media. So the best talent is usually passive. And then the other piece to note is that in the US, it's usually just a 2-week notice period between jobs. But some people want to stay a bit longer. I know that in Europe, it's again, a much longer notice period. In the US, it can be as fast as they can start in 2 weeks, but not everyone wants to do that because they might not want to burn bridges. You need to budget the appropriate timeline. Like if we usually encourage startups to really dedicate and carve out their time to making sure that all hands are on deck, all the relevant interviewers have blocked off their schedule and they think of it the same as you think about fundraising. Like you want to have a sprint where the founder does nothing else but like, pitches for 2 weeks and then kind of get the term sheets and et cetera. So similar model with hiring. You want to do basically nothing but interviewing for your top salespeople in the US and then make offers and then like try to figure out from your pipeline who is still interested, who has the right level of experience and also the right budget and try to be able to make an offer, but have a backup because if the person doesn't accept your offer, because keep in mind, salespeople are really good at interviewing. And until the last moment, you might think from what they're saying to you that they are really going to join you once you give them the offer, you're their number one choice. But sometimes they just use the offer as bargaining power for a different offer, or maybe they truly do like you, but you can't meet their expectations and they just take another one. Good salespeople usually are only on the market interviewing for about 2 to 4 weeks maximum. And then after that, if they're running a process themselves, which salespeople are good at, then they will have other offers and they'll be making a decision. So you need to act very decisively, very quickly, and make this a top priority. And once it is done, you also need to budget appropriate time for onboarding them and training them so that they're set up for success. So it is a non-trivial time commitment, but again, this is very valuable because this will be a key person who might create the success for your company going forward, especially from a revenue standpoint. So these are the personas that we often see. Like this is obviously a very gross overgeneralization, but a lot of founders will come to this decision tree in the road. And if you can, that's why I said it's sometimes nice to have 2 contractors that you can get where you can test out both personas at once. But in general, we see like from sales persona, seasoned veteran, deep Rolodex, higher compensation expectations. They want to hire subordinates and manage. They don't like to do the heavy lifting themselves for too long. And they have a playbook that they already have and that works. Less likely to adjust, but also much more likely to like know the best practices and to do it right from the first way. The growth hire could be someone who's eager to grow. They can experiment. They're more junior and have less industry experience. I would also note that junior just means in the industry. They might have a lot of experience in general, but perhaps they're like newer to tech or they're newer to, you know, whatever it might be. So they're very hungry to prove themselves. Usually a lower comp expectations, and they hustle as an individual contributor and hopefully a future leader, but they're not as proven usually on the leadership front. So they might just stay at the IC level, and you might need to layer them later with more senior director or VP of sales down the road. We would usually recommend hiring a country manager first, depending on your budget. And there are a few good reasons for it. It's the biggest one actually, and I face this myself as a founder, is that, you know, time is very limited. And when you're operating not only a team domestically that oftentimes lots of direct reports, but you're operating an overseas team in a different time zone in more than one market, it becomes really difficult to have direct reports in those countries, because then if you're managing each of the different salespeople directly, you're just on that many more one-on-one calls, you're just on that many more calls in like a different time zone. And that's tough. Whereas the country manager, we kind of call it like the EIR, founder in residence mentality. That person is building out your team for you. They own the P&L. They can take command of day-to-day operations, and they do a lot of that work, and they can report back to you. So instead of managing 5 people directly in a different market, in addition to your own like 10 direct reports in your own market, you just manage one person. But, you know, there's a trade-off as well, because that's a much riskier hire. These are some skills to look for: executive presence, like, you know, can create relationships, et cetera. And they can, most importantly, build the bridge between your HQ team and your US team so that you can truly manage a branch office. But it also comes with its own risk, which is that if the country manager doesn't work out, then you have to kind of go through it again. But the same could be said of any sales hire. Like once you start onboarding someone, if they're not going to work out, then that's tough. And the nice thing about the country manager role is you can get someone who can scale with the company, but so long as you're very transparent and open with them and setting expectations, they are going to start off as a salesperson. They're really more like a full stack account executive with a much nicer title. But they're going to be closing deals, they're going to be generating pipeline, and their ability to earn the right to build a team and to get the budget from you to build out their direct reports and subordinates is going to be contingent upon their success and the repeatable process they build. So then they have founder mentality, because I said in one of my earlier slides, you need to have some of these ICPs in place as a founder before you can actually expect someone else to do it. But then in turn, your country manager in the US can have like a playbook, which then they can share with others. So either they can be a player coach, like others are kind of the same level, but get coached by your first hire, or they can really be like scaled to that CRO, VP of sales type of person, and they build out the team. But it really depends on how things progress and you know, what's right for you. So interviewing, I guess I already jumped forward on this a little bit about talking about the pipeline. You need to run this like it's a sales pipeline. Hiring salespeople is a massively competitive market, and it's not just because of the shortage, it's because of how fast they operate and how much they're also like talking to and kind of courting different people at the same time. So that's why it can feel a little bit disappointing. I've had so many cases, and it's very heartbreaking and kind of frustrating, where the companies get really excited about one person, so then they sort of like drop everyone else in their pipeline and they just focus on that one person, and then they give that offer, and then that person does not accept the offer, and they're very surprised because they think, oh, we had such great conversations, you kept on telling me how you could really see yourself building your career here, what happened? And they'll come up with, you know, some like reasonable sounding excuse, but at the end of the day, it's because a good salesperson should be good at selling. And there's no better thing that they understand how to sell than themselves. And so you actually want to track for that. Like I find that if someone can't interview well, I don't have enough confidence to give them a job, even if their resume and their past experiences seem great. So the one nice thing about that is you can get a demonstration of their abilities just in this process alone. But you also have to remember this is a mutual interview. We've talked a lot about how you source and evaluate and look at different types of people, but they're evaluating you. They are thinking to themselves, in this world of opportunities, this vast, vast world of opportunities that I have, because I'm, as a salesperson, good at sourcing opportunities, why should I work for this company? Why should this company take my most precious asset, which is my time, and have ownership of it? Like, I need to feel like the founder is someone inspiring. The product has great potential. The growth trajectory is great. I need to really believe in this company before I join. So keep that in mind. It is a mutual interview. Every single conversation you have with them is an evaluation of you as well. And even if you are, even if you're offering them a job, you just need to keep that mindset in line. Develop a fair and consistent system of evaluation. I think, again, this goes without saying for most of our Western European companies that we work with. But you also don't want allegations of discrimination in the interview process. That being said, one thing to note is that sales in the US is heavily male dominated. And it is also heavily dominated by certain ethnic groups. So don't be surprised if most of your pipeline, so long as you make an effort to be inclusive of everyone, your pipeline is still going to probably look very male. And that's okay. People can't fault you on that, so long as you indicated that you are an equal opportunity employer and that you want to make sure that that things are designed well. And again, like, make sure that your internal processes are aligned. Like, set expectations up front, let them know what the timeline is, who they need to talk to, what the evaluation period is, and try to make decisions usually within a few days at most between each interview, so you can get back to them and move them on to the next round, and try not to make it too onerous. Like most startups, you can have like a take-home exercise, and you can have like a few interviews with the key people, but the founders will eventually make the decisions on this really key hire. And so you don't need to drag it out and put them through like 5 different rounds of interviews. And like, I've had companies before that wanted to do like 6 reference checks. Like, that's just, at a certain point, it gets so onerous that they're just not going to even go through with your process. Yeah, and then finally, like, make sure to give them a clear career development horizon. Like, they are part of your team. You want there to be a very open and trusting line of communication. And if they're joining as like, let's say, the first account executive, you want to set the vision for what they could become if all goes well. If they're, you just want to be open with them, but also be very exciting. Give them a sense or a taste of how big your market is, how big the potential is. This is why I mentioned it sometimes, like pitching investors, like the same things you use to pitch investors about how you're going to become the next unicorn. Like, use that as well for your salespeople and let them feel that excitement, let them feel the energy from you. Oh, and this is stuff about Alariss. I would be remiss not to include a quick plug for ourselves and what we do. But yeah, overall, and I think I have a contact information slide. Oh, these are just some like stuff about us. So yeah, I'm just going to leave it here and then ask for any questions. I tried to make sure to budget at least 20 minutes for questions, and we have 25 minutes for questions. Oh, maybe I should share that slide for a little bit in case anyone wants to take down my contact info. I think my contact info was there. Here it is. Oh. But I will pull that up as people think of the amazing questions they want to ask, if relevant.
I have one question regarding the immigration status. You mentioned that this is not legal to ask, but like, it really depends on the starting date, right? Because like what we heard from lawyers, depending on their immigration status, it can take months before they start.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, so I should clarify, those are discriminated based upon when they're at the company. If they feel like, oh, because I am, I guess because I'm a citizen of this country versus that, like I'm not part of this network. I mean, immigration status can also, or immigration status or nationality can also be kind of like heavily, it's oftentimes somewhat proxied by ethnicity and race also in certain contexts. That one doesn't come up as much, but yes, you can even post like needs US work authorization, yes or no, like, and then say that I'm unable to sponsor a visa. So that's not discrimination. That's just what your company can or cannot do. And so that is the one that I think is the least problematic or the least concerning, because many companies will explicitly say that they can or cannot. And it's a big competitive advantage for you if you can. So through the Alariss platform, we can actually sponsor visas on your behalf because we are what's called the employer of record. But we would only do it on a case-by-case basis. So depending upon how confidently we feel that we would be able to successfully do so. And also in the US, there's a classification called H-1B visas. So H-1B visa is a lottery system and there's no guarantee. So if someone doesn't win the lottery, then obviously there's nothing that the company can do. So it is very common practice for companies to say that we can't sponsor visas because especially for small companies, they don't have a legal department. They might not even have the legal entity because they're not working with Alariss to be able to sponsor it. And they also can't afford the risk of not being able to successfully sponsor someone. So that's a great question. And yes, as a clarification, it's only if they feel that once they've joined the company and they're working there that they are discriminated against because of their immigration status.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding filling the pipeline, if I may.
Yes, of course. Go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, you mentioned like multiple times, like running it as a sales pipeline, which makes total sense for me. Also filling the pipeline, it's similar in sales, so you have to qualify them and have good conversion rates and so on. But now filling the pipeline, we had our fair share also in Europe with recruiters and direct, like, okay, obviously you have it on LinkedIn and maybe some other platforms, and then maybe also directly poaching some people. But how would you recommend to run it? Would you recommend to do it all parallel? Because we actually in some cases relied basically on recruiters, and then realized, we have been working together for too long that it does not work out. And then you get actually, I mean, I'm just speaking for myself or for 90 Labs, we lost like a lot of time in this process. So, and they were actually very expensive and very known recruiters. So it's not, and how would you do it in the US? Would you do it all in the parallel or?
Yes, I would do it in parallel. So we always try to encourage the companies we work with to do it in parallel because number one, it shows how much better we are than other, we don't think of ourselves as recruiters. We sometimes say we're a global expansion platform, but one of the key products that we offer is a pipeline of talent that's already been vetted and curated and is excited to work for global companies. A lot of recruiters don't have experience working with international companies. And on a basic level, they don't find people who are very open to it because there is friction. For Western Europe, it's less friction, but there's still a 9-hour time zone difference depending on daylight savings from the West Coast US, for example. And so there is a certain amount of friction and there's also a certain amount of like desirability for these types of positions within the market. So you want to make sure that as much as possible, the qualified, because again, just because someone responded on LinkedIn doesn't really mean anything. It has to be a qualified candidate. They are excited about you. They're excited about the company. They're okay with, or even particularly excited. I know some Americans who prefer to work with international companies because they say, I like the fact that I'm not micromanaged. I hated working with bosses who are constantly checking in with me on Slack every single moment. I like having a little bit of separation with a different time zone where they can just trust that I take care of it. And then I like show them my numbers in the CRM and that's it. I get to be pretty independent. Like there are lots of salespeople that are quote unquote lone wolves. So they prefer this. So we try to make sure that there's absolutely an alignment in culture fit and in understanding of expectations, but not all sources will do that for you. And even when you're sourcing on your own, I mean, you're busy, you're running a company, you're doing all these things. If people do it kind of in a lackadaisical way, then the pipeline is going to look kind of spotty. So it's nice to have all channels. And that's why I also mentioned, if this is a priority, even though it feels like a lot of work, you want to carve out that chunk of time, just the way you would do for fundraising. Like the founders and the key people need to carve out a chunk of time and make sure it's all hands on deck. This is our top priority. But doing it right and having it in a 2-week sprint is so much better than I think what you were kind of alluding to, Martin, which is having it drag out, having a lot of uncertainty, kind of half doing it, half not, and also getting a lot of your growth milestones pushed off because you haven't built your team and your go-to-market is getting constantly delayed by quarters, not by weeks anymore.
Thank you. Question. What's the budget to hire somebody in the US ahead of sales?
So I think go back to the previous slide, which was, let's see. So head of sales, so this is the funny thing about using the title head of or country manager, it gives you a lot more flexibility. When you start putting director and VP titles, then it's a much more specific brand. And keep in mind, these are base salaries and OTE is usually double this. So if the
Sorry,
base,
I meant the budget from recruiters.
oh, from a recruiter standpoint, I mean, it depends. Like for Alariss, we usually just charge like a flat 10% for all hires. And then it's a like monthly platform usage fee of $1,500. But other recruiters, it's usually more like 30% is typical for a like normal recruiter. And then if it's an executive search, it usually goes up to 50%. So it really depends. And some of the best ones are retained search, which means that they have to charge you upfront before they even are willing to work with you. And those are usually the best kinds of companies, which is why we have like a small sort of monthly, we don't call it a retainer, we call it a subscription fee to use our products. But most of the reputable recruiters will use some sort of retained search. The ones that are purely on contingency are usually not very good. Some of them might be good, so you should not disqualify them, but the contingency recruiters, especially given how competitive the job market is, the contingency recruiters are usually ones with like very little reputation or brand, and you have to take a really big roll of the dice risk on them because maybe they won't charge you anything, but they might end up wasting a lot of your time.
So you mentioned platform access for 1,500. What's the what platform are you mentioning?
Oh, this is just for Alariss in particular, but I was saying like so it's the same thing as basically a retainer, but for other recruiting firms, it'll range from, a couple of $1,000s to even like, usually the typical for more senior level searches is what they call the 10-10-10 rule. So if the overall is 30%, then it might be 10% of the expected salary due upon the commencement of the search, 10% once interviewing starts, and 10% once the person is hired.
No, because you mentioned platform, so there's a platform you access, or because when you mention platform to us, we see like a web application. Is that what you mean about?
Oh, you're saying for Alariss in particular?
No, because you mentioned 1,500 to access the platform. Sorry,
Yeah.
for us, when you say platform, that means like you have a web application. What kind of web application you have? What kind of information you get from that application?
So for us, we would, the reason that we don't do direct sign up because we have quite a bit of demand. So we always want to make sure it's a mutual fit. So we do a demo call with a member of our team beforehand, but then the platform includes the biggest one is it includes a platform of access to a pipeline of salespeople that fit the job description and the specifications. And then it also later on includes payroll and employee benefits like health insurance and things like that. But this is just for us in particular. Other companies will be different in how they operate and what they offer.
You say like 10-20% on what? Annual salary or total compensation, base salary?
It's usually base salary for sales hiring. So base salary, because it's hard to really know what the OTE will be in the end of the day because it's a commission that they're earning, and if they don't earn it. So what's also typical is that in the first 3 months, it's called the ramp up period. So during the ramp up period, the full OTE is usually paid out or a partial OTE is paid out because oftentimes, like I said, the salesperson is really benchmarking to the OTE, not to the base for their expected comp. If they are only earning their base for an extended period of time, that is way below what they can earn to support themselves. So in the first 3 months, when you're ramping them up and onboarding, it's basically like the training period, then it's common to pay full and then sort of a graduated between OTE and base. But as far as recruiters go, most recruiters only charge on base salary, but some might charge on the total.
Yeah.
I have a question on onboarding. I'm not sure like how exotic it is, but we consider to make kind of an extensive onboarding, but also fly people into Switzerland for just longer than a week, not just to get to know each other and shake some hands, really like to absorb the culture and also because we are a very technical field. I don't want to go into the details, but it's a very specialized field, and we are looking for very kind of specialized people. Or so they will also kind of need this time to absorb like what we do. Like, what do you think is a good time period like for onboarding, bringing someone overseas, and how much do you, from your personal experience, feel is this more considered as a perk in that sense that people like to come to Europe? I think it's maybe also on a base by base cases, but do you think like how attractive does this make the process, and how would you consider it that, well, what's a good house number for like 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks?
That's a great question. So how attractive it is depends on the personas. From what we've seen, the growth hires love it. It's a huge perk. And then they might, if you give them some time to like budget before or after, they might even go backpacking around and do some sightseeing. Like, it's a huge perk for them, which is another reason many of them are excited to work with international companies. For the seasoned veteran persona, it's usually seen as a burden because they have a family. Like, they've been global executives for much of their career. They're kind of tired of having to like constantly fly to clients and live out of a suitcase. So they'll do it, but if you're not going to fly their family in, they're probably not going to be willing to do it for more than like a week, maybe 2 weeks if you're lucky. So it really depends on the type of person and your kind of relationship with them, but just, be mindful of their incentives and their things. And some companies will give like a per diem. So if they're on business travel, then they get that. But again, if it's someone who's very seasoned, they're not really incentivized by like a free hotel room and like, comped meals. They would rather spend the time, with their kids and not away from their families for too long.
Okay, thank you. So could if I would summarize for a growth hire, you would say like if we do 2 weeks, for onboarding, get to know each other, and maybe 1 extra week, even like I think it's maybe also well spent. 1 week should just like explore countryside, explore Switzerland, explore Europe. Do you think that sounds attractive to some of them?
That seems a really big perk. I mean, I can definitely, so we had some companies do this, and actually it's great because people will post on social media. They like post on LinkedIn, oh, hey, here I am in Sydney, Australia, like, with the company, or I'm in Germany, and they have like the t-shirt, the logo. It's really great for publicity. It's good for attracting future hires, because then everyone's like, oh my gosh, I'm so envious. You got to go to like Lausanne, and you got to like try Gruyere cheese and fondue at the like Swiss Alps. Like, that's so cool. Like, that will really appeal to certain people. So I definitely would say if you're able to budget for it, like, and able to kind of spend that time and make them feel really welcome, it's great for team building. It's great for organic sort of social media impressions. But it really depends on the person. So this is part of the conversation as well, which is like, we oftentimes find people who say, oh, I have a very complex and highly technical product I want to sell, so I need someone with a lot of experience, kind of going more for the seasoned veteran without also, whereas the growth hire might be really willing to learn, but it takes them time to learn and to ramp up. So there's always a trade-off. There's no perfect solution, which is why I also keep on using that phrase of emphasizing pipeline, because as much as possible, even with using like different, let's say, recruiters or whatever it is, as much as possible, you want to review everyone together. That being said, because most recruiters that are worth working with require some sort of skin in the game from the company, otherwise it's a waste of their time, then it is an expensive experiment to run, depending on who you're working with. But like, having different candidates in the pipeline where you can look at these types. And again, there's so many personas outside of seasoned veteran and growth hire. Those are just the two opposite ends of the extreme that we see most commonly. But you want to have like people across the spectrum so you can feel and figure out what is best for you and what's best for your company.
Thank you.
Yeah, great questions, Martin.
I would have another one, but I don't want to take it. Maybe I don't see like in the room, like if someone is raising a hand. Maybe real quick, like there's also something I heard quite a bit, and we are not necessarily doing this, but there's a saying of hire fast and fire faster, right? Like this kind of thing. Maybe it applies to Europe as well as to the United States, like where it applies better, I don't know. It's something we certainly don't do at 90 Labs at the moment, but I also see that sometimes maybe we should have kind of reevaluate for some positions, just kind of rather hire 2 or 3 people at the same time. And if everyone is good, I mean, if it's a revenue making kind of opportunity, or like how do you call it, like business part, if you're on the commercial side, I think if 2 or 3 people are great, then you can keep them all, right, even if it's not budgeted for. So what's your take on this one?
Yes. So I've heard a lot of different angles on this: hire fast, fire fast, or hire slow, fire fast, or just there's no perfect solution. In general, I would say this is why we oftentimes encourage the contract to hire model, because it's not about hiring and firing. It is a mutual arrangement where both parties are agreeing to testing each other out. That being said, not everyone's going to agree to this setup because it requires, you know, again, a lot of risk and a lot of onboarding risk. But keep in mind, this is why I emphasize too, it's a two-way interview process. It's not just you evaluating them, it's them evaluating you. So the contract to hire model allows you to start working together very quickly, and you can get within the first couple of weeks or months some understanding of what this person's capable of, so long as, again, the expectations are properly set. Either this person, it's also hard to do if they're part-time. Usually they would want to be not full-time employed somewhere else. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard for them to dedicate the time. So it takes a lot of negotiation, and it's not for everyone, but that is one sort of like quasi solution to this, to what you're saying. The other for firing fast is, again, this is why I really put the non-discrimination clauses up high. You just want to make sure that if you do fire them fast, you are very clear in setting expectations and in your documentation of why they're getting fired. Because then it exposes you and also Alariss and any other partner you're working with to a lot of like lawsuit risk if you don't do that in the proper way. And then finally, you know, you want to think about the impact on your culture. Companies' reputations really matter. There's a lot more access to information about employers. There's Glassdoor, there's like tons of things. And so you don't want a situation in which, and I see this happening with certain companies from countries where labor is a bit more of a commodity. And so they do try to recycle through people very quickly, but they're almost flabbergasted because in their own countries, like the employer has a lot of power, and the feedback loop very seldom criticizes the employer. Whereas in the US, the employees have a lot of power. And if you are not seen as an employer that is trustworthy or that is credible, then that can come back to haunt you. And so hiring fast and firing fast is good so long as you set expectations clearly, which is again why we often say, like, telling them up front, this is a contract to hire basis. We're going to pay you to like start sort of training and onboarding and working with us. And during that time, both sides can evaluate if this is a good fit. But it's also not, usually it's not very common or even possible to get people to start doing work for you without paid. So again, it's kind of, it is a little bit of a risk, but it's a much more mitigated downside risk than the alternatives could be.
And how do you see the probation period in that equation? Like, because that's something actually I think a lot of European companies at least are not literally not exploring because it's basically something on paper, but it's hardly used as a model of evaluating the final fit. And
what we usually see is 1 to 3 months with the possibility to extend. 1 month is a little bit short because it can, you know, a lot can happen. And also if you're having them go in and training them, that basically the training piece just takes a month. But even for others, like we've had salespeople close like, you know, $250,000 deals within the first 2-3 months they were part of a company, because for them it's a little bit easier once they understand what the product is and how to sell it. It's a bit easier for them, especially if they already have a network that's relevant, because then they can just, you know, basically message some of their friends and other people. So during the shorter piece of time, it does favor the seasoned veteran slightly, but even the growth hire, like if you set your own expectations accordingly, that this person is going to ramp up and learn very quickly within the 3-month period, they're going to at least get us like a pipeline, and I can track their progress by tracking, you know, the number of calls they're making, the emails, because it's all listed in the CRM. Like that open dialogue and communication can work out either way, but usually I would say no less than 1 month, and even that's kind of pushing it, and probably targeting around 3 months for the probation. Maybe 6. Some people, again, it's really case by case. Yeah, Elena, Dr. Gross.
No, Elena, please. Fantastic session. Thanks a lot. Sadly, I missed the beginning, so I'm not sure if it was already covered. Your salary expectations was really, really helpful. I was wondering what kind of option expectations are on top of the salary, and would it be typical that the options are replacing some of the salary expectations, or are US employees expected to get that on top of it? And how does that differ between the different, say, levels or hierarchies of the actual jobs that you mentioned in terms of VP or a younger employee?
Yeah, and also I would qualify by saying the more junior employees don't necessarily mean they're younger, because some people might just be more junior because they recently transitioned into sales or the industry. So that's just something I would note. But to go to your other question, the equity and ESOPs would be in addition to what's listed as the base salary. So some salespeople would not need or require or want equity, depending again on the persona and the type. Like sometimes they just don't really understand equity enough, so they just see it as like kind of a nice to have, not a need to have. But then usually the ones that are joining a startup would want some sort of equity upside because they are taking on a large amount of risk. The market is changing quite dramatically. And so I don't want to give certain numbers or ranges because it literally changes almost on a monthly basis. Like, as you probably know right now with the public tech stocks so volatile, that is percolating into lower valuations for founders raising, but also higher expectations of equity grants because the expected value is lower because of the volatility in the market. Whereas when, just a couple of months ago, when there was a lot more optimism, then you could kind of get away with like lower equity opportunities. And this also varies based on stage of company. If you're a seed, series A, B, C, D, E, and it also varies based on the reputation of your investors. Sometimes like people are more likely to take less equity from a company founded by like a tier 1 VC than by a company founded by like, a VC that they've never heard of before. And also the country of the VC will sometimes matter. I know it's all unfortunate, but people just have to use heuristics because they just don't understand how to value the equity. And so yes, the founder can tell them, oh, I raised on this valuation. This is like the last price round I had. But at the end of the day, a very savvy salesperson, again, they're evaluating you and interviewing you just as you're interviewing them. They're going to be calculating in their mind, what is the likelihood of success of this company, and therefore how likely is it that my equity will even be worth this much to begin with. So a lot of salespeople, by and large, are much more fixed on the base and commission comp, and equity by and large is not going to be as high of a grant for a salesperson as it is for, let's say, an engineer or products manager.
Okay, what about the general manager, or say we say the VP of sales? Can you give a range of equity that would not be in percent? Say they get 1% of the company, that may be way too high, but just as a
so for VP of sales or CRO, yeah, for VP of sales CRO, they're usually targeting about 1 to sometimes even 5%, depending on how crucial they are. So 1% is usually baseline for VP of sales. Like that's basically the bare minimum. Again, people use the titles differently. So sometimes they call someone VP of sales, but that person has like, 1 or 2 years of experience. They're not a true VP. They're more like a sales manager. So in that case, you can get away with like probably a different comp, but usually for VP of sales, and that actually has only been increasing in terms of the amount. But VP of sales is a very, very short, like incredibly hard to find. Like every investor that I know is trying to have like help their portfolio companies source for VP of sales, like personally, like their top performing portfolio companies, they will personally go out there and try to help fill this role. So that is just.
What about a chief of commercialization or head of marketing? Is it also 1% plus?
It depends on the person you find. If you're looking for someone, and I know that we're kind of at time. I mean, I can go a little bit over. I'll just push off my next meeting a bit, but it really depends on the person you're trying to find. But if you're looking for someone who deserves that title, again, there's title inflation. But if they deserve the title of a C-level title or a head of title, they're usually looking for something a bit higher. That being said, some companies will call someone head of, and they're really like, once the company gets to the next round of funding, they're usually no more than a director. And in that case, maybe it's like 0.5%, 75 basis points. So you can kind of flex around with it a little bit, but I'm just anchoring to what you're calling the title and kind of mapping it out to the level of talent and the level of expertise. But if you think about it, like all of you have raised venture funding, like your investors, especially if they led the round, they minimum get 10%, oftentimes even 20 or 22%. So for someone who can really help accelerate your business and perhaps like 5x your revenue, to get 1% is actually, and also they can only work for you. They're not like an investor who can invest in 5 to 10 portfolio companies a year. Their entire time and their career and their professional identity is tied to your company. So giving them 1% or more for someone with that background and for someone with that opportunity cost is not super high. So that's just something, again, it's good to set expectations on budget and to make sure that you're able to offer the kind of compensation that is commensurate with the talent you're going after.
Super helpful. Thanks a lot.
Great. Well, does anyone else have any last questions? I have the contact information there. So hopefully Corinne and others from Swissnex can help share my information. I hope this was helpful. I know I was talking at people for a while, but I love the level of engagement in the questions. So at least I was able to address some specific things that people were interested in.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it was really helpful for a lot of the startups. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. For me too, actually. I learned a lot. Thank you so much, Joyce.
I'm glad. Well, it was recorded. So if anything that I said is like embarrassing or whatever, please help me edit. But overall, I stand by what I said. And hopefully if anyone has questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. The contact information for the company was shared. And I know that everyone has my direct email account too for Swissnex.
And just a quick question. I know you have some East Coast experience too. Is that something that you cover as well with Alariss at this stage, given after the pandemic, talent is a little bit of everywhere?
Oh yeah, we cover talent in all 50 states. Okay. There's obviously certain states with, like Wyoming as a state has about 500,000 people total. So the likelihood of getting someone from Wyoming is kind of small. And given that California is the most populous state, there are more people here, but we try to be very diverse in our hiring and try to, one of our missions is to empower people regardless of their country of origin or their physical location or circumstance of birth. And that includes people who are born in Iowa. They just don't have the same access to opportunities as those who are born in or live in New York.
Absolutely. Well, it makes sense. Thank you so much. It was really wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Joyce.
Enjoy. I'm sorry I can't meet you in person.
Thank you so much.
Like I said, I'm glad I didn't risk infecting anyone. So take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Bye.